r/AskReddit. Which is the worst single decision in history ever made by a person? Alright gentlemen, we've successfully fended off the Greeks for 10 years, our great city of Troy still stands. If we keep this up, surely they will realize the siege is fruitless and return home before long. Yo captain, there's this big ass wooden horse outside. Oh rad, bring it in. To be fair to the Trojans, there wasn't all that much they could do because the gods had essentially made up their minds. Laocoon was like, hey, this is a bad idea, and then got eaten by a giant water monster. The Trojans kind of took that as a sign that the gods clearly wanted them to bring the horse in. Plus Cassandra protested, but you know, cursed by Apollo and all that. And the Trojans were probably fucked regardless, since Hector was dead and Achilles was back in the fighting, and extra mad because Patroclus was dead. The horse was just the death blow. Edit, sorry, I got the timeline mixed up. Achilles was already dead at this point. Still, without Hector the Trojans really didn't have much of a chance, especially since the Greeks had formidable soldiers who weren't Achilles, Agamemnon, Menelaus, etc. Kaiser Wilhelm II firing Otto von Bismarck. Bismarck had a plan. He always has a plan. But not when an incompetent Kaiser boots him out of his means of putting his plans into action. Bismarck had everything set up perfectly, but Wilhelm II decided to fuck up everything he had set up, and got into World War I for it. Bismarck told Wilhelm what works out to. Hey, idiot, you'll lose all that you hold in 20 years. Bismarck also predicted World War I being started by some damn fool thing in the Balkans. Well, having just watched Chernobyl, I was wondering how far down this thread I'd have to go to find Anatoly Dyatlov. You can't find him because he is a graphite roof. The Donner Party of 90 pioneers choosing to take a shortcut when heading west from Illinois to California in 1846. Said shortcut led to them getting trapped in the Sierra Nevada mountains and resorting to cannibalism. Hey, let's create a coffee machine that uses a single-use plastic cup for every cup of coffee or tea. How bad can the trash from that really be? I actually read that the creator of the K-Cup, John Sylvan, regrets inventing the pod system. This should be way higher. Many inventions that turned out to be bad ideas were things where the potential effects were otherwise unknown at the time. But Keurigs started coming out at least a decade after pushes towards recycling and keeping plastic out of landfills had become widespread. Dude had no excuse for not realizing what effect his invention would have. Well, the decision of Inal Huk, the governor of the Khwarezmian city of Otrar, to attack Genghis Khan's trade caravan was pretty bad. Khan was famous as a ruthless warlord, not the sort of guy you want to piss off. But maybe they could have got away with it. Genghis sent 3 ambassadors to negotiate a settlement. Which is when Muhammad II, the Shah of Khwarezm, made the really bad decision to kill one of these ambassadors and send the other 2 back without their beards as a sign of humiliation. Genghis Khan was so enraged he assembled an army and destroyed the Khwarezmian Empire. Wiped out every town they had. He even rerouted a river to wipe out the village where the Shah was born, wiping it off the map. By 1120 there wasn't much of anything left. So, both Inal Huk or Muhammad II of Khwarezm qualify. Take your pick. I gotta mention this every time it comes up, the Mongols fucked the Middle East so hard, it still hasn't recovered. They filled in irrigation ditches that had existed for thousands of years. They set back the agricultural development of the region back a long time, and many of those areas never recovered to pre-Mongol levels. Eastman Kodak deciding not to go forward with their own newly invented digital cameras and instead sticking with film because it made them so much money at the time. Isn't the real shit decision that the guy who invented the digital camera in 1975 at Kodak wanted to let Kodak patent it, and they said nah. Who's going to get into these things? I got married in 1990. I remember our wedding photographer explaining the direction of photography and the coming extinction of film. I figured he must be crazy and I doubled my investments in desktop calculators instead. Now you see me sequel not being called Now You Don't. Oh man, I've been saying this for ages. The decision by the Scottish to invade England during Black Death must be up there. Scotland have made a lot of very stupid decisions in its past, like that time we kicked out half the population. Most of them went to Australia, New Zealand, the USA or Canada, which is why there are so many people with Scottish heritage there. Robert Ballard, one of the guys who discovered Titanic, says that his biggest regret is that he and Jean-Louis Michel didn't bring a piece of the Titanic up with him when he first discovered it in 1985. At the time, they didn't want to disturb the wreck and leave it pristine. But if they had done so, then they would have been able to claim legal ownership of the wreck under international maritime law, and therefore more control over it. Because they chose not to do that, everyone and their grandma is free to take artifacts and pieces of the wreck, and this makes preservation impossible. Who's really out there running private souvenir grabs on the Titanic? James Cameron, probably. How about the guy who bought 20,000 Albanian slaves, brought them to Cairo, trained them to be the greatest warriors of their time, and then got overthrown by said slave warriors because they were so well trained? Time Suck podcast about Napoleon Bonaparte is where I got this from. It's a good one if you have an hour to listen. Wait, what? How in the hell I never heard about this and I'm Albanian lol. Not all Mamluks were Albanian, Op is wrong, mostly Circassians and Turks, but Muhammad Ali, the founder of modern Egypt, was Albanian. Maybe not the worst, but maybe Ronald Wayne. He was a co-founder of Apple along with Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak in 1976. Just 12 days after forming the company, he sold his shares for $800. He owned 10% of the company, which would be worth $80 billion today. Regardless of the exact numbers, it's accurate enough he held a large enough stake in Apple that would have rendered him one of the richest guys ever. He sold it for so little. In a later interview he stated that he doesn't let the decision haunt him, given what he knew at the time. I think that's the only perspective one could take without going insane. Edited to add, my inbox is blowing up because hundreds of people are trying to exhaust all possible ways to say hindsight is 20/20. We know. Maybe the worst business decision ever made was by Xerox with their Alta computer. Xerox invented the graphical interface modern computers use. Desktop, folders, copy/paste etc. They basically invented the modern computer in the 70s. But the problem was, the people in charge at the time were businessmen without any technical knowledge, so they didn't realize what they had. They did nothing with it and gave it away to universities and showed other companies. The famous story is that Steve Jobs saw this and within 5 minutes realized this was the way computers would work in the future. He copied it, because Xerox didn't patent their invention and didn't do anything with it, and the rest is history. Xerox could have been Apple or Microsoft. Or both. They could have had a monopoly on the entire PC industry. Almost every company uses Windows in their offices. I think 80 or 90% of consumers uses Windows. That could have been Xerox. They had the tech maybe 10 years before anyone else. They could have been the most valuable company of all time, but they just gave it away. Brutus decided to join Cassius in murdering the dictatorial tyrant, Caesar. The reason? They suspected his intent to become a king. Which then started a chain of events leading to his adopted son Caesar becoming a military dictator without equal, having all the powers of a king without being called one. When this Caesar Augustus dies, his name and title is passed on for the next 400 years, almost like you would a crown. Monarchies then returned all over Europe, in the style of Augustus Caesar. And so, the decision of Brutus to join the conspiracy in effect changed all of Western civilization for the next 1900 years to adopt the very political style he wanted to avoid. It would not be until the 1770s when America and later France would begin revolting and experimenting with democracies and republics. Mao Zedong's revolutionary campaign, the Great Leap Forward, resulting in millions of people starving to death. Mao's Great Leap down the staircase. How did they not realize moving all the people who grow the food into factories would result in famine? Interestingly, one of the other contributing factors was the state encouraging people to kill sparrows. Sparrows were regarded as a pest, and it was thought that they are the seeds of crops. Thus farmers were encouraged to kill them. In actual fact, sparrows ate insects and helped keep the insect population down. Without the sparrows, the insects were left unchecked and allowed to feast on the crops, ruining them. Either the Great Leap Forward or the time I had gas station sushi. Dude, that was a bait shop. Bait worked as advertised. He caught something. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe.